everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead.
This week, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to BBC Strategic Disability Lead, Robbie Crow.
My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hey Robbie, how are you?
Hi Evie, I'm not too bad. Thank you very much for having me on board.
Oh, well, thank you. It's such an honour to have you on the podcast. How's your day going so far?
Yeah, it's good. It's been a busy week. Obviously, we're recording this during the first bank holiday week of May, so that should mean that I'm doing 4 days work, but it seems to be that I'm doing 5 days work in four. So It's been quite a busy week so far, but yes, we're doing really well.
Yeah, I can imagine if you're trying to cram a full working week into 4 days, I can imagine there'd be a little bit of stress there.
Just a little bit, but it's all part of the job, so we're doing well.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, I know that like me, you are visually impaired. So to begin with, could you tell me a little bit about your VI condition?
Yes, so I am registered blind. I have been since I was born. And I have microphthalmia and coloboma, which basically means that I was born with small eyes, and I was born with the pupil of my eye being slightly deformed. So it means I have some limited useful sight in my right eye and absolutely nothing, not even light perception, in my left. So it means that I have a guide dog. I use a long white cane a lot. So I just face the same barriers that most sort of blind people do. But because I've had the condition my whole life, it's sort of normalised. So it's not as if when I was having to learn to cross the road, I was doing it with sight, and then I had to come back and learn to do it as a blind person. It's everything I've learned to do in my life, I've just learned to do with my visual impairment. So that's the key thing for me, in that my sight is just normalised to me. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, definitely. I think it just becomes a part of daily life, doesn't it? If you've never had sight or never had much sight, you don't think of it, you don't think any differently. It's just life. And like you said, you've not had to kind of learn to do things with sight and then without. I can imagine that would be really, really difficult to do, because it would be like a whole new way of learning things, whereas for us both, it's just normal life.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I know that you are currently the Strategic Disability Lead at the BBC, but before chatting a little bit about that role, could you tell me what your journey into employment was like?
Yeah, so I did the typical thing of going to university, and when I left university, I studied marketing. So when I left, I was adamant that I didn't want a job in the disability world. I didn't want to be known as, the blind person doing disability things, and I very much set out to go and work in the big bad corporate world and make millions of pounds. I very quickly found out that it was hard to find jobs, and I ended up working for a charity that I was involved with called Ocean Youth Trust Scotland, and I worked there for a year on a placement scheme, and after that I found a job with an organisation called Glasgow Centre for Inclusive Living. And this was a marketing coordinator, so it very much was into my skills that I used and learned at uni. So I thought I'll take that, and it'll be a starter for me to get into work, even though it's working with disabled people. It'll be a starter, and I can use that to get experience, and then I'll go off into the big bad world then. It was then I discovered the social model of disability, which I know we'll talk about later. But I discovered the social model there, and it really was a light bulb moment for me. And from then, I've had various jobs in various guises, but they've all been around supporting disabled people. So I worked in the NHS launching their first disabled graduate programme with Glasgow Centre for Inclusive Living, which I took part in. I then moved on to the Jubilee Sailing Trust, who used to operate accessible voyages on their tall ships that were built for disabled people. So they were built with the adjustments in mind. I then went to work for a charity that worked on disabled access reviews around the UK. I then went to the Scottish Government, and then I found myself at BBC. So my role has always been sort of within the third or public sector, and it's always been really providing that support to disabled people. So I've had quite a varied career in disability for someone who left uni and was adamant that they weren't going to work in disability at all.
Right, okay. I mean, yeah, you've done loads of different things, which is really cool. I mean, you talk about not really wanting to work in disability at all. Do you think that discovering the social model of disability was like a massive factor in you kind of changing your mindset? And do you think if you hadn't discovered that, you would still be working within kind of the disability side of things?
Oh, completely. So I think discovering it was a light bulb moment. It was literally flipped my life within the space of 5 minutes, and it was because I spent my entire life, you know, being told that I had to fit in, that I had to change the way that I do things because I'm blind in a sighted world, and I had to basically change who I was in order to fit in. And discovering the social model separated out disability and impairment. And I think that's the two important things of social model is that disability and impairment can be separate, and it switched my head on to the sort of barriers led approach. So without a doubt, discovering it really did create who I am today, and I really don't know what I'd be working in today if I hadn't have discovered it.
Right, okay. I mean, you talked a little bit earlier about going to university and things. And I mean, I was wondering, how was kind of navigating university as someone with limited sight? Was it difficult or was it all right?
I mean, I lived at home for university, so I went to university quite close to where I lived, so I didn't do the whole living on campus thing. So it meant a lot of early morning bus journeys and, a lot of perhaps not going out as much as other people. But on the whole, I enjoyed university. I made a couple of good friends I'm still really close with now, and I talk to a lot. Um, but yeah, I think university was fun. I think it's interesting that I don't work in the area now that I graduated with. So obviously, I graduated with a marketing degree, but I don't work in marketing now, and I haven't really, other than that brief spell with GCSEL. So I think university taught me more than the academic side of marketing. I think the biggest thing that university taught me was probably how to write. And a lot of what I do now is around writing, whether that's creating content on my LinkedIn, whether it's looking at reviewing the policies at work, whether it's, creating guidance notes or writing speeches, whether that I used to do in my government role. That was what I learned at uni was how to write and how to come across well and how to communicate. And I think that's the most important thing that I took away.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. So let's chat a little bit about your current role then. So can you tell me about your role at the BBC and what it entails?
So I am strategic disability lead at the BBC, and that covers the whole BBC corporation. So it's pan UK, it's all over the UK, and it's across all of our divisions. So I basically sit as the subject matter expert for disability within the workforce. So there are two types of my role. There's the one that I do, and there's a good friend of mine called Nicola Gardy. She sits in the what we call the creative lead for disability. So she looks after disability on screen. So scripting, portrayal, anything anytime you see something related to disability in any of the BBC programs that are out there, you'll find that she's been involved with that. But I lead very much on the workforce side. So I lead on making sure that our adjustments policies are in place. I lead on making sure that managers are getting the right support that they need to support disabled people in the workplace. I lead on making sure that our recruitment is accessible, that our online systems and platforms are as accessible as they can be, that our assistive technology provision is in place and working. Basically, anything related to disability inclusion within the BBC workforce, and that's for BBC Public Service and BBC Studios. It falls under my purview at some point. So I'll be honest with you, I didn't realise how big the job was when I applied for it. I saw this job advertised very last minute with about 3 or 4 hours to go until the job was due to close, and I thought I'd quite like that job in 10 years' time. So let's apply for it, and I'll get some feedback on my application. And here I am doing the job. So I didn't fully understand the scale of the role that I'm in when I applied for it, but now that I'm in it, it really is a sort of unique opportunity for me to be leading all of our disability inclusion work across the whole corporation.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, I was thinking that as you were kind of describing it. But yeah, I imagine it would be, I mean, you'd be covering a very large area, kind of making sure that there's inclusivity across the company. So yeah, I would imagine you probably didn't realize that when you applied for it, if it was like 3 or 4 hours before it was due to close.
Yeah, no, really, I just found a job for D&I lead disability. I thought, oh, that looks fun. So I went for it. And I think, but I think that possibly helped. I think if I'd have sat and researched it and looked into, what was all involved and how big it was, it might have put me off applying because I didn't think I had the experience. So in some ways, it probably did help that I only found the job at the last minute.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think sometimes you just got to go for it. I think it's always good to think things through, but sometimes you can overthink things too much and you can almost doubt yourself. So yeah, sometimes you just got to sort of take a leap of faith and see what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Access to Work scheme then is a government initiative to enable the disabled community to gain and remain in employment. So I was wondering, is this something that you've used and what support have you received?
Yeah, so in this role, I've and in previous roles, I think the only role that I didn't use access to work in was in my Scottish Government role, and that's because civil service departments are expected to meet the costs out of their own budgets rather than using access to work. But in all the roles that I've been in, apart from the government roles, I have utilised access to work. I think this role that I'm in just now is probably the time that I've used it the most. I think up until this role, I only really used it for the occasional bit of equipment or to get an upgrade on software. I definitely didn't use it to the capacity that I should have been. I think access to work funding caps are basically £66,000 per person per year at the moment, and that's due to go up. They're due to announce the new figure for this year soon. So £66,000 is quite a lot of money for getting support in the workplace. So now I use it I have a PA, a personal assistant funded by Access to Work, who helps me do the things that are a bit harder for me to do because of my visual impairment. I also have taxis to and from work, from home, funded, and I have taxis in work funded as well. And I also have a few decent bits of equipment to help me do my job. I think, to be honest with you, access to work is probably one of the best kept secrets within the UK for employability for blind people. I think we use it a lot at BBC. And a lot of people who work at BBC who are disabled and who need adjustments, they use it as well. And we really encourage people to do that because the Access to Work scheme is there to give people the help and support that they need. And I know I certainly haven't utilised it as much as I could have in the past. So I'm certainly taking advantage of it now.
And I would imagine that the support that they've given you is really helpful in making sure that you can get your job done to the best ability possible. But yeah, definitely, I think sometimes we can be a little bit cautious to ask for help or admit that we maybe need support. Or sometimes, like you said, it's a best kept secret, so you don't know about it. But I think if that support's there and you have the ability to take it, it's always good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of people don't do it because they're scared of being told no, or they're scared of justifying themselves. Where I've always taken the approach that as long as you deal with access to work in a very professional manner, and you can justify why you need things through your job, and more importantly, what barrier they help you overcome in that job, then access to work are very friendly in, giving you the support to do it. The funding is there to be used. It's just they've got to justify spending it, because at the end of the day, it is public money. So they can't just give you it for anything. But as long as you can make a well-reasoned argument as to why you think you need, support, then it usually comes through. And I've seen people getting support for maybe travel buddies on the London Underground. So they need someone to literally just do the journey from their home to their place of work with them. Access to work will fund that. They will fund, drivers for you if you have a lot of driving in your role. They will fund support workers, they will fund job coaches, they will fund equipment, they'll fund training. So I think a lot of what's out there, people just don't know about. I think a lot of people don't know as well that you can actually, if you go into Google and type in the access to work, I think it's access to work manager guide or access to work decision guide or something like that. You can actually get access to the full access to work staff guide. That's what it is. You can get access to the full guidance that staff use to make decisions on access to work. So all the information's out there for people that need it, and I think it's just a matter of, I would really encourage anybody who needs access to work to go and apply for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what would you say then are some of the kind of common challenges that the VI community encounter within the workforce?
So I think the VI community are, I was going to say unique, but they're not, because there are other impairment groups that have their own similar challenges. But visually impaired people, at the end of the day, if something isn't accessible, so if a system you're using at work that your work relies on isn't accessible to a screen reader or to someone who uses Zoom, then they can't do the job. It's not as if the job will become harder or you have to find a different way of doing it. Is if something's not accessible, you cannot do your job. And I think that is quite a unique barrier for blind and visually impaired people, because actually it doesn't, especially in terms of digital accessibility, if something's not accessible in the office, it's not going to be accessible at home. It's not going to be accessible in another office. It's just not accessible. So digital accessibility, especially now in the work world, is a massive issue for blind people, for visually impaired people, I would say. And I think that's probably one of the biggest ones, is that digital accessibility barrier. I think the one that comes after that is probably cultural and attitudinal. So only 25% of blind and visually impaired people are in work. So because of that, we don't see a lot of blind and visually impaired people at work, and we don't see that role modeling. So because of that, when sighted people do see visually impaired people work, sometimes they are surprised, and sometimes they've got those misconceptions about, oh, you're blind, you couldn't possibly do this. You're blind, how are you going to get up those how are you going to get up those sets of stairs? You're blind, how are you going to make that cup of coffee? So I think a lot of the barriers that exist can be attitudinal and culture as well, and it's about working to address those barriers as as they arise. And I think that's the hardest part of disability inclusion, is that actually, in many ways, making physical adjustments, so buying equipment, adapting buildings, putting in accessible toilets, although they might be in the short term the most expensive thing to do, they're actually the easiest because you can get a solution pretty quickly. It is the attitudinal and the cultural barriers that take the longest to fix, and that's because you need to go into a company's culture to address them. You need to provide training. You need to be looking at how impactful is that training. What are the skills gaps after that training? So I think for blind and visually impaired people, as well as the accessibility element, you've also got that attitudinal element. I think, going back to what I said about only 25% of blind people being in work, you've also got that underrepresentation element. So actually, sometimes employers are just scared to employ blind people because they don't know how to do it, because there aren't that many of us in employment at the moment. I think that's quite a unique barrier as well.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you in both of those areas. I think from an attitudinal perspective, it's literally just that. Like you said, there's not much representation out there. People aren't seeing the VI community in the workforce just doing their thing. And because they're not seeing it, they almost sometimes think it's not possible. And there's that doubt there, like you said. And I think with digital accessibility, I completely agree with you as well. I think technology has gotten a lot better. You know, we've got screen readers and we've got things that can help us out, but we're still not at the same level as the sighted community. That we're still at a disadvantage. There's still things that we can't do that the sighted community can do without much bother. And so I think that there is still a bit of work that needs to be done there to make sure we're all on a level playing field.
No, exactly. I think it's also about, I actually see the majority of my work in my role is actually about influencing non-disabled people more than disabled people. And I think, let's take documents for an example, a Microsoft Word document. People always go to me, is Microsoft Word accessible? And actually, yes, it is. But 99% of documents that are created by Access to Work are inaccessible. And it's because you can take an accessible tool and still produce an inaccessible output. And I think it's because non-disabled people don't have the knowledge or the skills to be able to think about accessibility from the start. One of my favorite quotes says, if you build an accessibility from the start, it's not really a quote, but it's just something I say. If you build it in from the start, then it's not complicated, it doesn't cost money, and it makes it better for everybody. Whereas if you built something, if you've created a 100-page document and not thought about accessibility, you're going to have to go back and it's going to take you time to really edit that document to make it accessible. Whereas if you'd just done a few simple things from the start, it wouldn't have taken you any extra time to make that document accessible. And actually, it would now be more accessible to everybody and not just screen reader users. So I think it's about getting that knowledge up and addressing those skill gaps that non-disabled people have. And I think that's especially prominent when it comes to digital accessibility.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you. It's so much quicker, like you said, to just go in with accessibility at the back of your mind than to then re-edit it after. Takes up actually more time than if you just thought about accessibility in the first place.
Exactly. I mean, I was working with one of my teammates the other day and I showed him how to use headings in Microsoft Word. And after he'd done it, he was like, this is brilliant because I can now enable navigation pane and now I can navigate through my own document. And I'm like, well, yes, that's a benefit to everybody. It's not just blind people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like there's some shortcuts and things like that we might know because we've got a screen reader that sighted people may not know. But it's actually just as beneficial to them as it is to us.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Okay, then. So, what would you say the kind of benefits are then of having a disabled person in your workforce?
I think we could spend a long time discussing this. I think like the disabled people are amongst the best problem solvers that you can have out there, and they're also the best problem finders. It's if you want to know something's inaccessible, a disabled person, a screen user, can probably tell you that within 5 seconds, whereas it's going to take a tester a day to produce a report to do that. If you want, it's as a blind person, we've had to solve problems all day long. If there's a traffic light not working, but we still have to cross the road, we have to process that in our minds and find a different way to do it. So employing disabled people, first of all, it brings skills. You know, it brings it brings problem solving, it brings communication, it brings management skills. It just brings those core skills. I think second of all, it represents your workforce and it represents the people that you're working for. So actually, if you don't have disabled people in your workforce, but a large proportion of the people you're targeting with your product, your service, your company are disabled, then how do you know that the product or whatever you're doing is actually meeting the needs of those disabled people? You could pay for some expensive market research, which you could do once a year and then put gradual updates out, or you could just hire disabled people to make improvements as they become apparent. I think that's one of the important things is if you don't employ disabled people, you're not representing the world that we live in, and therefore you're not seeing the benefits of that. And I think that's the two sort of biggest benefits I would say when it comes to employing disabled people. But it's just the same as, why wouldn't you want to employ anyone? It's disabled people make up 20% of the population, around 20% of the population. And if you are not hiring them, then you're missing out on huge skill sets. And as well, you know, I don't know what the data is, but a lot of people, I'd say the majority of disabled people become disabled later on in life. So actually, you could have had a very successful career before you were disabled. Why wouldn't you want to bring that successful experience in to your workplace? And you could be missing out with that just because you're not hiring disabled people and because you're not giving adjustments at interview, because you're not creating an environment that is inclusive to people, to everyone, then you're missing out on these huge untapped opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I completely agree with you there. Now you've kind of mentioned the social model of disability, but let's sort of get into it in a bit more depth. So you are a huge advocate for the social model of disability. Do you think progress is being made in this area?
Um, has progress been made since the social model first launched? Yes. But I don't think progress is as quick as any of us would like, and that is including amongst disabled people. I just don't think enough people know about it yet. I don't think enough people truly understand what it is beyond a buzzword. I think, I still hear people calling it, oh, the social justice model, or the opposite of the Medicare model, or I think I even had someone call it the social media model, which was just ridiculous. But I think there's not enough awareness of what the social model actually means. This whole thing about recognizing that impairment and disability are two different things. I am visually impaired. That is a fact. There's no way of getting around that. My eyes just don't work. But that's not what disables me. My disability is caused by inaccessible environments. It's caused by people's attitudes. It's caused by, glass doors. That's what disables me. It's not my visual impairment. So I think there's a real absence of true understanding of what the social model actually means. And I think there's a lack of advocacy for it. I think because there's not many people that do understand it in its truest form, there's not enough people pushing for it. And those of us that are pushing for it, although we are very loud in pushing for it, there's just not enough of us to be making a true difference. So I think there's huge potential for the social model to change things, but I don't think we're in a position where it really is making a huge difference yet. I think what we need more people to understand it. We need more people to advocate for it. And actually, we need more non-disabled people to advocate for the social model than we do disabled people. We need it to become a norm that a non-disabled person is saying, is this accessible? We need more non-disabled people using the accessibility checker within Microsoft Word. We need more disabled people pulling up venues for not having the red cord and the accessible toilet dangling all the way before. All the way to the floor. We need more disabled people just picking up on what does it actually mean to be barriers led and what do barriers look like to disabled people and trying to address them before change be made. I think the real difference we'll see with the social model becoming more advanced is only if non-disabled people start talking about it more. And I think that's the main challenge that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I'm honest with you, I mean, about your point about even not that many disabled people knowing about it. I didn't know that it even existed until October of last year. And I was taught about it on one of the podcasts that I did. And so it goes back to your point of if even not all disabled people know about it, then I mean now I know about it. I'm so glad because it's such a brilliant thing. But if not all disabled people know about it, how are non-disabled people meant to know about it as well and kind of put it into action? And so I agree with you. I think that there is still a lot more work that kind of needs to be done to make it a norm in society.
Yeah, completely. And that's the thing. It's just about more people pushing for it, and it's about more people realizing that it's barriers that disable people, not impairments. And that's not to mean there are some situations and there are some impairment groups where people are disabled by their impairment. There is no doubt about that. But the social model allows for that, and the social model does acknowledge. But I think for a lot of us, the social model is the way forward.
Yeah, definitely. So you were the chairman of the Max charity for a number of years. What would you say you learned from that role?
Um, Surround yourself by people that are a lot smarter than you are. That's the biggest thing that I learned, in that a leader is only as good as the people that they surround themselves with. So, and that comes from thinking about ways to get things done, but also what blockers might be. So actually, if there are people surrounding you that perhaps aren't thinking the same way as you, or are blocking progress, then that can affect the whole group. Now, I was very lucky at Max in that the board of trustees that I had around me, the staff team that I had around me were all fantastic. And they were all united in the same goal. But I could see very quickly how that could change if that wasn't the case. So being chair of Max told me that being a good leader is all about the people that you work with. And actually, sometimes the majority of the time, it's about listening more than speaking. That is what it really taught me. But it also taught me the importance of peer support and making sure that you never forget the reason for doing things. No matter how hard Max works, there is still going to be 90 children this year born with microphthalmia, anophthalmia, or coloboma. Max can't change that. No matter how much money they have, it will take billions into researching those conditions to stop that happening. So what we concentrated on was actually finding a cure isn't the important thing. It's how do we support people living with the conditions to make sure that they have the best life possible, and realizing that being born with a Max condition isn't the end of the world. And, that includes things like supporting parents to come to terms with their trauma, because there is no doubt that having a child born without eyes, especially when you don't expect it, it is going to have trauma. But what I concentrated on was trying to have initiatives in place where that trauma perhaps wasn't passed on to the child, because, as I said, when you're born with a condition like a Max condition, you don't know any different. You don't know the sight that you've never had. So for us, it doesn't need to be that negative experience. And that's really what I did pick up on at Max, and that the important work is around helping parents of visually impaired children realize that it is more about the barriers-led approach than the impairment. And actually, if you take away the barriers, then there's no reason why your child can't have a full and really fulfilling life. So it's changing from, rather than trying to cure the condition, let's cure the barriers instead. And I think that really just cemented my approach to me. So being chair of Max just cemented that really was the right approach.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I really do agree with you on that. So what would you say then has been your proudest moment to date?
Um, that's easy. Last year, my beautiful wife gave birth to her first child. That is the got to be the proudest moment of my life, and I'll say that happened because of Max. So my wife and I met through Max. My wife's brother has the same eye condition as I do, and we met through Max. That's how we got together. If I wasn't blind, we probably would never have met, and I wouldn't have the life I do now with my beautiful daughter Elsa. So yeah, that has got to be the proudest moment.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, that is really lovely and brilliant that you guys met through Max as well. Um,
Yeah.
so what would you say then are some of your goals and aspirations for the future?
I think my goal is to keep on doing to hopefully keep on doing a good job, and that we are never going to create an environment in this world in my lifetime, I don't think, that is completely disability inclusive. I don't see us getting to the stage where disabled people are never not a marginalised or underrepresented community. But my goal is to just keep making things that little bit better. And I think what I've learned in the last year is that change happens in small waves. You know, it's flinging a stone into a pond. It's got a small ripple at the start, but when it keeps going, it gets bigger and bigger. So it's my goal is to keep concentrating on those small changes, on those small wins to make more happen. And it's also ultimately to make sure that we have more disabled people in employment. If I can do something that gets a disabled person into employment tomorrow, then that's the best thing I can do. So, obviously I want to see my career grow and I want to be more of that thought leader and becoming more of a thought leader on LinkedIn and trying to, generate out the words that I'm getting out there. But ultimately, it all comes down to making those small changes and to keep having that work-life balance as well. I suppose I think I can be guilty of recognizing that because I am at the start of a leadership journey within the BBC. I do want to spend a lot of time working because I actually enjoy working. But one of my goals as well is to make sure that I have that better work-life balance with my family, with Caitlin, with Ailsa, that we go on the nice holidays, that we just enjoy spending time together, and realizing that my work will always be there, and the work to make a more disability inclusive society will never be complete. It's not one of these things you can tick off. So it's about realizing the importance of work-life balance to make sure that I'm always energized to make those small changes, and the best way to do that is to have that good balance in life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that work-life balance is incredibly important. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I mean, the work that you are doing is absolutely incredible, and I think is really needed. So thank you so much. I know that you have a very busy schedule, so thank you for giving up some of your time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
No worries, Evie. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, it's been so great to have you, and thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.